Welcome to FEO on the Air, the voice of the festivals and events industry in Ontario. This week, it's FEO Masterclass with your host, FEO CEO Dave MacNeil.
Good morning and welcome to FEO on the Air. Before we get started with today's sessions, I'd like to take a minute to recognize today is the National Truth and Reconciliation Day. And all of us at FEO and our members, we recognize the deep impact of residential school systems, we honor survivors, and we reflect on our shared responsibility in reconciliation. I understand we might not have a big group here today because of all of the recognition ceremonies going on around the province, but we will be recording it and posting it to all of our platforms. So in all of that, our thoughts and our prayers from all of us at FEOs go out through the Truth and Reconciliation Day. Now I'd like to recognize and welcome Janet Sellery from the Safety Alliance. Janet, welcome. Always great to have you as a guest.
And thank you for inviting me. Just before we launch into the questions, I'd just like to let everyone know that I'm joining from Stratford, Ontario, and would just like to take a moment to acknowledge and honor the ancestral guardians of this land and its waterways, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Adirondack neutral groups. Apologize for my pronunciation. We acknowledge that we live and do our work on territory governed by two treaties, the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and the Huron Tract Treaty. To this day, many Indigenous peoples continue to call this land their home and act as their stewards. So thank you for having me.
And recognize you have your orange shirt on. I searched my wardrobe, could not find anything orange, so glad to see we're 50% recognizing the colors of the day.
Yes, we're doing our little bit.
So Janet, yeah, the Event and Safety Alliance, safety is always so important, and we've sort of flashed this as our risk management session and talking about safety and the importance of it. A while back we had the Reist Informatica people on talking about protecting our systems, our data management, our databases, our internal systems, our files, and everything. And I think it's important to talk to you about safety and what we need to reflect in those documents. So it's kind of a state of the union. Our spring and summer season is over. We're entering our fall and winter season. And it's been a mixed bag. A lot of people have had great successes. A lot of people are still struggling through. And unfortunately, we've lost a few festivals along the way. But from your perspective, what have you seen as what's caught your attention this year that you haven't noticed in other years?
Right. So I really like that you've sort of framed risk management as including a whole lot of different things, right? There's cybersecurity, there's financial responsibility, and in this way, we're looking more towards physical safety. My consulting practice is all about occupational health and safety, which involves the workers and our volunteers. And I wouldn't say that we're necessarily seeing a lot of new hazards, but we are definitely seeing some persistent hazards. And when it comes to OHS, big issues that we need to keep our eye on are temporary stages and structures, working at heights, so anything to do with ladders, lifts, and working on elevated structures, electrical hazards, especially for those outdoor events where equipment is exposed to water. And another one in that sort of bucket is material handling. So when we think about manual handling, that's anything where we're lifting, carrying, lowering, pushing, and pulling. So think about every single box and container of equipment or product or flyers or anything is something that people have to move around. Manual handling can lead to frequent injuries, and those are injuries that will often stay with a person for years. They'll be managing that sore elbow or the sore knee or back or whatever. And then we also have some challenges around material handling equipment. like forklifts and dollies, carts, wheeled cases, and so on. And this was really brought to the forefront earlier this summer. There was a production manager at Jacob's Pillow in the US who died after being crushed by a dolly of platforms. So they were moving this dolly and they were on a bit of a hill and tried to protect the dolly from getting away and ultimately ended up being crushed. So, those aren't new hazards, but they're ones we need to continue to keep our eye on. When it comes to our, outside of the occupational health and safety, where we're really beginning now to involve all the members of the public, we have two that really stand out. And one of them is weather, and one of them is crowds. So, with weather, we've seen a huge evolution on how event organizers are managing weather, and they've become very good at looking out for high wind and lightning. And those are two huge concerns. But most events now will have some sort of documentation or plan to deal with it. Typically, it'll be a weather matrix where they will have thresholds for, you know, at what point do they have to move people to shelter? At what point do they need to stop an event? And they'll have high wind action plans in place. But now that we're dealing with so much in the way of climate change, we're looking at a much broader range of weather hazards, everything from extreme heat and humidity to wildfire smoke and poor air quality, to precipitation, heavy rain, flooding, hail, snow, ice, extreme cold. So it's become a much bigger realm of concern, and we need to keep our eye on all of those. And then the last one that I really have been focusing on is crowds. So that involves crowd management and security. We've seen continuously over the past years crowd crushes inside event sites, issues with crowds outside the event site, which still are the responsibility to some degree of event organizers, hostile vehicles, and the main example for that recently in Canada would be the Lapu Lapu Festival in British Columbia, which was just a devastating tragedy. And then another that is something we all need to keep an eye on is harm reduction. So thinking about our crowds and whether there will be concerns about substance use and sexual harassment. So I wouldn't say we're seeing anything brand new, but we're definitely seeing the evolution of some of those hazards and how we need to address them.
And I just want to circle back on a few things, and let's start with the staging.
Yeah.
I know we've all, as associations, been involved with different government forums on the temporary staging.
Mhm.
Are we any closer to getting legislation or like a check that has to be done, an inspection that has to be made? I know we've all made recommendations and have been part of panels and forums and everything, but a
Mhm.
lot of time, all of that gets lost in the government minutia.
Yes.
Have you got any insights? Are we any closer to that, or?
Well, we have had amendments to the Ontario Building Code. Um, I think it's coming up on 2 years ago. They added definition for temporary state for demountable stages and demountable structures. So those are now well defined, and there is a threshold at which they need to be permitted. So the place to go for, really specific information is the building officials within a municipality. Now, it still remains that some municipalities are handling this differently from others, but that at least has been formalized, and the building code is quite specific. The other piece to do with that is the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development, which is a whole alphabet soup of letters to define that ministry now. I'm part of the Health and Safety Advisory Committee for Live Performance. And following the death of Scott Johnson at the Radiohead concert in Downsview back in 2012, I led a working group to create a guideline that would assist with those structures. It was published very quickly within a year. So it came out in 2013, right at sort of the 1 year mark. And we've been working towards updating that for the past at least 5 years. I was at a meeting on Monday where the provincial specialists let me know that they were making that one a priority and they will be returning it back to our working group for more review later in October. So I'm really hopeful, and I know that I'm a bit of a glass half full optimist on this, but I'm really hopeful that we will have that in the new year approval because it goes beyond that original guideline and gives people some more specific information that they can use to guide their work as they're dealing with those structures. So I think that'll be a great addition.
And I know sometimes as festival organizers or managers, we think that the venue is responsible for this. We think that the production company is responsible for this, but it's really a shared responsibility through everybody. If something happens, your name is going to be on the list as well as
Absolutely.
the other two.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I really encourage people to do is to really understand your role. So, under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, we have roles that include the constructor. So, in other provinces, it might be called something a little bit different. But if you're building something, if you're, doing what is called a construction project, and that's quite well defined, then you're governed by the regulation for construction projects. And the role of the constructor, who may be the venue or may be the promoter, it depends on contractually how that's set up, that the company or the person in that role is responsible for coordinating the health and safety of all the people on that site while that project is being built. And there can be ambiguity there, which is why I'm so looking forward to this new guideline, because we do get into more specific detail about how you would identify that. But it really is going back to your contracts. And also understanding that every company who's participating in an event, they are an employer. So each of those, so whether you have a staging company, you have, someone who's coming in to provide bleachers or audio or any of those things, every single one of those organizations must carry out the duties that are required of an employer. So there really is not a lot of buck passing. The constructor has to oversee the entire site, and individually, all those other companies have to be compliant as well. And then that trickles down to each of their workers.
And that's why it's so important for event organizers when you're hiring independent contractors to make sure that they have all of their documents in
Yes.
place and that their people are certified and trained properly to do that.
Yes.
And then that's not a verbal commitment. That's something that should be part of your written contract so that you've got it to fall back on.
100%. Contracts are so important because they you need to know who owns health and safety and who is the person, like one never wants to think about the worst case scenario, but if something goes badly wrong, everyone is going to be charged or there will be lawsuits, and you want to be able to show due diligence. And if anyone's ever going to learn just one section of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, it would be this. And this is for both employers and supervisors. There is a section for each that says take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of the worker. The law is not expecting you to take every precaution because then we just simply wouldn't do events, but it must be reasonable in the circumstances. So if you're going to do something outdoors in a remote site, you're going to need something quite different than if you're in a soft cedar performing arts center or a school or a a marathon site. So you really need to customize what you're doing to the event that you're actually carrying out.
And I'll take that one step further. For us, it's not only our workers, but it's our audience. Is that we have to
Absolutely.
make sure that our audience is safe as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So audience safety is, you know, when we talk about event safety, my professional focus is on OHS, but we're blending in public safety. So we're dealing with all our first responders, all our billing officials, crowd safety. So that's including security, public health. As soon as you're serving food or you're setting up porta potties or, all of those kinds of things, you have a wide range of requirements that you need to meet. And it's up to the event organizer to really take a long, long look at their event and figure out what could possibly go wrong, and then find the requirements they need to meet to make sure that everything goes right.
So while we're here on crowd sizing and crowd issues, we'll jump over weather and come back to it. But
Yeah.
you mentioned a few of the things like public health and vendors and permits and
Mhm.
stuff like that. Again, an important part of your contractual obligation is to make
Yes.
sure that they're all updated. And most municipalities will require vendor permits to be submitted well in advance, which will
Yes.
go through that process. But
Yeah, municipalities tend to be, and larger event organizers tend to be quite thorough about that. But you want to make sure that your vendors, your suppliers are trained and have those proper certificates and training. And that starts with identifying what kinds of safety documentation you're going to require. So if I'm consulting to create a health and safety program on a large event, my advice will be to them that they need to get WSIB clearance from each of their contractors or vendors, or have some kind of alternate. Like you need to know that whatever company is coming on your site is covering their workers for workplace injury, because as an organizer, you do not want that landing on your account. Or if you're not carrying WSIB, so workers' safety and insurance board coverage, um, you just don't want to be in that position of liability. And another thing is gathering certificates of insurance so that in addition to the event organizer insurance, everybody who's coming on site should be carrying their own insurance so that the organizer doesn't end up being responsible for any lapses in their work. Um, for the more, I would say some of the larger events, I want to see that all of those folks have health and safety policies and procedures, and want to make sure that they understand they have an obligation to have training certificates and records on hand. So, specific training like working at heights, forklift, elevating work platforms, propane handling, which think about all your food trucks, WMIS. Some professions you require licensing, like electricians, making sure you have adequate first aid training. And then some of the training that you will need to provide to all of those people coming on site would be a health and safety orientation or briefing. And I feel very strongly, and many, many people are adopting this, that before anyone begins on site, they have to have an orientation or a briefing. And it doesn't need to be long. For the biggest events I've done, I can go through the critical information in 15 to 20 minutes, but no one gets their wristband or their accreditation until they've done that. And the other piece is making sure that every person understands what the emergency response or evacuation procedures are going to be. Not that every person who's pushing a box needs to know the entire thing, but they need to understand what they are supposed to do. What is the signal going to be? How will they know that there's an evacuation? And where are they supposed to go? And do they have tasks they need to carry out before they leave? So those are all really critical pieces.
yeah, and we'll get into that in a little bit more when we talk about working and communicating your plan.
Mm.
When we think of crowd sizing, the other thing I always think of is, making sure that, if you have smart serve, if you're serving alcohol
Mhm.
or all of those different certificates you talk about, is the importance of having them on site. If an
Yes.
inspector comes around, that you've got a copy of them in your office, that you can, here's my SmartServe file, here's all my health inspections, here's my certificates that I need in place, that
That's right.
if somebody comes, you're not scrambling looking for all of that documentation.
And it's really important. I know a lot of people really roll their eyes at paperwork, but I'm a former stage manager, so paperwork is kind of my thing. But it's really important to document things so that people understand their responsibility and their liability. So it's really clear what their piece of the puzzle is. And by making sure you've got documentation, you can identify and resolve any gaps before you go to site. And just as you said, any government official can require documentation. They can shut you down until you can provide it. So if you are putting up structures, you need to have your stamp drawings from your engineer. You need to have the things that um, are you using a forklift? Are you doing those pre-use inspections? Can you prove it? Can you show that that forklift has had a formal inspection once a year? Because those are the kinds of things that can trip you up and can cause delays, which are really frustrating for everyone. And yet they are there to protect the people working on your event.
Yeah, and then simple things like ensuring your fire extinguishers are up to date and certified and
Exactly.
checked. I mean, people often don't think about that. They think, oh well, we've got 20 fire extinguishers, which meets the code, but if 15 of them are out of date, you've got a
Yeah.
problem.
And also, where are you putting them? Are you putting them close to the places they're most likely to be needed? Because it's, if they're all sitting in a box in a tent somewhere, you can be pretty sure that they are not going to be when when something catches fire, you're not going to have them quick enough. So,
And are they the right type of extinguishers as well? As there's
yes,
many different models out there.
yes.
Crowd size is another thing. I mean, soft seating is not as big an issue, but when you think about setting a stage in a field, and we always see the Queen's fencing, 10 or 20 meters in front of the stage to protect the artist, and the security is all behind that. But often that squishing and happens beyond the Queen's fencing. What are we
Mhm.
doing to combat that?
So first of all, I'll say I am not a crowd safety expert. I have tremendous respect and I advocate for crowd safety training at every opportunity. There are lots and lots of resources about how to do that better. There is so I'll tell you a little bit about the ANSI standards. So ANSI standards are American National Standards, and there's an organization in the US called ESTA, which has a technical standards program. And they create standards specifically to event safety and entertainment. And they have a standard. They have one on weather preparedness. They have one on crowd safety. And those are a really great place to start. Unlike most standards, those standards are free. So you can log in, you can download them, and that'll give you a really great start. There are other organizations like the Global Crowd Management Alliance that specialize entirely on crowd safety. So for folks who are, doing security, who really want to get more into that as an area of expertise, I recommend GCMA. And the other part is education. So um, I encourage everyone in every role to begin to understand crowd safety. But if you're going to be calculating densities and looking at appropriate egress routes and exit sizing, that's something you need to learn formally. And we'll talk a little bit more about the conference in Toronto, but Event Safety Alliance Canada is offering a 2-day course in crowd safety management, which is being taught by one of the experts from the UK, Andy Hollinson. And to be honest, most of the experts we've worked with are from the UK because they kill more people in crowds historically. And so they have had a real imperative to figure out how to do that well. So there's a 2-day course on that. And then there's a 1-day course exclusively on show stop. And that show stop procedure was developed following the tragic deaths at the Astroworld concert with Travis Scott. The family of a young woman named Madison created a foundation. It's called the Pink Bows Foundation, and they are supporting the broad training of Showstop. So we're offering the first Canadian course in Showstop as part of our conference. Um, so there are many dimensions. There's math, there's psychology, there's site planning, um, and there's an increasing number of Canadians who are getting very, very good at it. But it is a specialty that needs a lot of focus.
Okay, so we'll circle back to weather before we move
Yeah.
on. And
Okay.
as you said, weather's become much more complicated than it once was. But it's
Yes.
also, in some respects, become a little bit simplified in that a lot of times your insurance policy dictates those 5 steps, like you mentioned that, a weather warning, you do this, a weather
Yep.
alert, and, when and where you have to clear your site, because that all becomes part and parcel with your policy, your insurance policy, and in dealing with your local authorities, police, fire, and everything
Mm.
else. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the insurance industry is definitely got a lot of input into how um, events are managing their weather. It's really important for you to talk to your insurer and be really clear about what your insurance policy will cover, because there's usually very formal um, criteria for which, like, if you don't meet that criteria, they will not pay out your cancellation, right? So, if it says, um, that a meteorologist has to determine that the wind speed or the likelihood of lightning is at a certain threshold, like, you don't just get to cancel because some people feel it's too cold or too hot. There has to be an objective measurement for that. And that's why it can be really important to have access to a professional meteorologist, because that person can do forecasting that is very specific to your site. If you are thinking about trying to do your weather planning based on an app on your phone, I really caution you against that. They are not accurate enough to make a life and death decision, which is what you might be doing, right? If you're looking at wind or you're looking at lightning, um, they're not precise enough in their timing or their location to give you the certainty you need to decide whether or not you send people to shelter. Again, going back to our conference, we do have an applied meteorologist who's coming in, Kevin Stanfield, and he's going to be talking about his experience with the Calgary Stampede. And I was fortunate to go to Calgary this summer and visit their operations center and have a conversation with him about how they are addressing that event, because that's a gigantic event and it runs over, a number of days, has a lot of outdoor performances, midway, just so many things that need to be considered.
Yeah, shameless plug here. My daughter's an executive producer for major events and festivals, and
Okay.
she quite often will bounce stuff off of me. And I remember one event she was working on. I'm not going to name the event, but they had a weather incident, and
Yep.
2 days before the festival, she was asking me, well, why do we need so many off-duty police, and why do we need so many security? Because different cities, different municipalities, different
Mhm.
requirements, right? And well, 2 days later, they had a weather event that had to evacuate the site. And a day afterwards, she said, "Oh man, we could use double the amount of police to help
Yes.
clear the." So oftentimes these are all like insurance policies, right?
Yes.
Until you need them, you never know why they're there.
Yeah.
And quite often, your off-duty police and your security requirements are just in case something like this happens, that
Oh,
you have.
100%. You look at the people who are there to protect your event site, they're like flight attendants, right? We don't need flight attendants to bring us cans of ginger ale and snacks. We need them to take over and guide people to safety when something terrible happens. Um, and making you can now look at your event, and once you have more training, you can get really quite specific about where you need to deploy people and how many breaks they need and how do you cover for breaks and how do you make sure that everyone is on the same page. How are you communicating to your audience when you need to do that? I mean, for your daughter, that's a tough call. It's a really tough call. And even with the best insurance, you can be pretty sure there's going to be losses financially. And if you've saved everybody's life, then that's a good thing. But you may have financial losses regardless because events are so expensive.
Mhm.
Um, you still have to pay people. But yeah, so have those conversations with your insurance contact and make sure that you're really clear and be really honest with them about what you're doing too. Like if they don't know the risks that are involved in your festival, you may not get the kind of coverage you need for the hazards that may be involved. So yeah.
So we've covered a whole lot of topics here. Before we get into plugging your conference for you, I've got just a couple more
Sure.
comments. And now that we're doing a recap on many of our festivals and stuff, now's the time to recap your risk management plan, see what worked, what didn't, what you need to work on before the next festival. Can you talk about the importance of doing that annually, that it's not just a document that you make and put in a file and say we've done it?
That's right. So, with all things like your risk assessment, where you sort of in a formal way go through and identify all the hazards and you figure out how to control the hazards for your specific event. That's a document that then you can use year to year, right? You look at it. So when I work on risk assessments, I'll look at, okay, there it is. We did the best we could. We put in everything we could think of. And then, of course, every year something new gets thrown at you. So you go back and you update it. And maybe you figure out um, that there's one other precaution you could take, or you learn something from attending another event. So most of us who work in events, we go to a lot of events. Take that time when things are, I'm never going to say in a lull or quiet, but when you're in your off season or your pre-production time, really focus on what were the things that kept you awake last year. What were the things where you got feedback from your patrons or your contractors? And go through methodically. I really, there are tons of resources available, and I know in the thick of things, you just don't have time to go and chase that down. But have a look when you have a bit of time to really focus, and also talk to your colleagues. So there may be someone who has a similar event. Sure, you're competitive in terms of um, you want someone to come and spend a weekend at your rutabaga festival instead of going to someone else's, bean festival. But when it comes down to it, we all want all events to be successful. And someone figured something out that's working. See if you can learn from that and adopt it. Um, so taking that time and digging in and finding out how you can make improvements. Or here's another thing, you did something, it worked really well, but now you're going to have a change in staff. How do you make sure that that learning, that good thing that you did continues through, even though you've got a different person in the role? Because sometimes things can, people go, oh, wow, I remember 5 years ago we used to, oh, yeah, we sort of stopped doing that. So that's a,
So that leads really well into the final thing we get into is the communications plan. I mean, so many times risk management is done at the senior level, and it might have some bottom up feedback. But quite often, once the plan is in place and ready to be executed, like you said, that 15-minute walkthrough and
yeah.
knowing the chain of command, if something happens, what do you do? And
Mhm.
and being able to respond quickly to find the person in charge who then will report it up the chain as necessary. That communications is often where I think we as event managers slips, and
Yeah.
so much happens so quickly. But it's so important that everybody at least knows the chain of
Yes.
command and what to look out for.
And I think, we need to communicate people with an understanding of how events work. So we need to give people information in advance as much as possible and say, whether it's through an email or maybe we pull people together on a Zoom call. I've done both of those things, but we communicate expectations that we expect people to comply with legislation. We need to make them aware of site-specific hazards. So, if we're going to have a lot of forklifts running around, if we're going to have a lot of work at height, there's things that everybody needs to be aware of. We need to make sure we have competent supervision on site. So everyone needs to have a supervisor. Um, Make sure people are trained and really be clear about personal protective equipment. So standard during a build is going to be a hard hat, a high vis vest, and safety footwear, but you're going to need different things depending on the task. Informing people in advance, like not just waiting till they roll up to your field, that they need to have their hard hat and their vest and their shoes. That way you can have a reasonable expectation they're going to have brought them with them. Then they get to the site and you gather people together and you tell them, who is your supervisor? Who do you go to report a hazard or a concern? What's the process if you have an injury? Where is first aid? How will you know if you need to evacuate the site? Where's the meeting place if you do? What are the main hazards? It doesn't need to take long, but also just, and some people do this in an online format, and you can do that. I personally really like to look people in the whites of their eyes and say, this is important. We need you to take care of yourself and take care of each other. And we need you to tell us if something happens. And then treat people with respect and appreciate, if someone comes forward, the things to say is thank you for pointing that out. Here's how we're going to address it, not blow them off and let them feel like they've been an inconvenience. We need to create that environment where people will speak to us.
And I think it's so important, like you said, it's one thing to have a Zoom meeting, it's another thing to sit in a boardroom around a whiteboard, but that 5 to 15 minutes in the field,
Yeah.
actually pointing where things are, what needs to be looked out for, you know, what the potential risks are, that you have a quick reference.
Mhm.
You need to build that into your plan, really.
Yeah, and stuff that's current. Like, hey, today we're looking at really, really hot temperatures and it's going to be really humid. Here's some places that have shade. We have an office that has air conditioning. We're putting out extra water. Like just making sure that people understand if you're feeling, you're starting to have heat stress, um, tell your supervisor you need to take a break in a cool place and get some water on board. Um, People need to, or listen, we're anticipating a big storm. We're going to try and get as much of this work done before it hits, but we may need to finish early today and adjust the schedule for tomorrow. So,
So we're
and
40 minutes in. We've covered a lot of topics. We could probably go another hour and 40 and not hit everything.
yeah, you're going to
But
have to hit pause on me soon.
before we leave, I want to give you an opportunity to promote your conference that's coming up in Toronto. Um,
Yes.
just tell us a little bit about it for people that may
All
have missed
right.
it. Or
Well, fantastic. So first of all, with Event Safety Alliance Canada, we are a not-for-profit. We are pretty much entirely volunteer-driven. We have someone part-time who helps with our social media, but otherwise, it's the work of a dedicated small band of volunteers. Our website is esacanada.ca. And if you're looking for resources, a lot of the things I've sort of referred to are found under our resource tab. And they're organized by category, and most of them are free. So wherever we can keep free information available to you, we will. On our homepage, you'll see a sign up where you can sign up for our e-newsletter that keeps you busy with updates and upcoming events. So our conference, we're especially excited about our conference this year. It's being held at the TIFF Lightbox in Toronto, which is beautiful cinema space, lots of space for lots of people. Our main conference runs from October 20 to 22, and we're offering over 30 general and breakout sessions on a wide range of event safety topics. Festivals and Events Ontario is one of our partner associations, which means we extend a discount of $75 to FEO members. And you can receive the discount code for that price by contacting Debbie Mann. I think Debbie's email is probably on your website, but it's debbie@festivalsandeventsontario.ca. And we are very happy to have folks from our partner associations join us. In addition to our 2.5 day conference, we're holding pre-conference workshops on October 19th. The first one is that show stop procedure, which is 1 day, and OHS boot camp, which is being led by Claire Mocock, who has done health and safety for Live Nation and casinos, and she's now a consultant, a freelance consultant. So her boot camp goes for 3 hours on that Sunday afternoon. Following the conference on October 23rd and 24th, we have crowd safety management, runs 2 days. And on the 23rd, we have 2 half-day workshops. One of them is called Protective Spaces with Good Night Out. It's 3 hours and it's all about harm reduction and sexual harassment prevention. And we've also got in the afternoon on the 23rd a crisis planning for events course, which is, I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's something that many of us would find valuable. So we're super excited. We have honestly such a wide range of sessions that I really feel there's going to be lots for everyone. And we hope to see you there.
Thank you very much, Janet. A lot of information as always. And we look forward to you joining us at our conference for a session or two on safety and risk management as we move forward.
Always
Thank
happy
you
to
very much
join
for joining.
our FEO friends. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to FEO on the Air. Join us next week, next Tuesday at 11 a.m. when Jay Nyhouse has one of our suppliers in the supplier spotlight. That's next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to FEO on the Air, the voice of festivals and events in Ontario.